Well, this week we're continuing in the parables of Jesus, particularly the ones found in Luke. And we talked last week about how parables are stories that have a message, a teaching objective. And Luke shares a ton of them. Luke was a physician and a carer of people, and he must have found the parable, a wonderful way to communicate. And so, yeah, I found that interesting about him as a person and an early, follower and disciple of Jesus. So cool. All right. Well, we're going to get started, and there are two of us, and that's going to be great because we're going to share with all these people that join us.
I'm Norma Dunstan, and delighted to be here.
I love it when I get to see you, Norma, even on this. I'm thankful for that. I like getting to see you. Okay. Well, today's lesson, the title is actually The Persistent Widow, and already mentioned it's a parable that we're going to discuss. And then the question that we're going to be asked to consider today is, how persistent are my prayers? But in this parable, there are actually kind of two main characters. There is this widow, but there's also a judge. And I think both of them have probably a meaningful lesson we can learn from their behaviors, probably. And then I thought, just for fun, to do something a little different this week, I'm going to also mention our closing thoughts or reflection questions so that we can kind of be thinking about those as we discuss the lesson. And so often at the end of our book, and also if anybody's looking, I should always mention these are available at the church if you wanted to stop and pick one up. They're the Sunday school lesson books that a lot of the classes use. And so if anybody ever wants one or wants to follow along, you can definitely pick those up. But our lesson asks us to consider at the end, it says, always has a what about me section where you can kind of relate the lesson. And what we're asked to think about today is the idea that our prayer life can be aggressive. And we're going to see the widow model that for us. We're also going to consider the idea that prayer can change people. Prayer changes us, and it can change the people that are involved in our prayer life or that we're thinking about, or maybe people who are aware that we're praying for them or about that. So, and then one of the things I thought was cute, I have kids, lots of us do, and you do too. Sometimes we feel like a broken record because we ask for the same things or have the same concerns on our mind all the time. And kids can be like broken records. And even our study even kind of mentioned that we can wear each other down, but that's okay. And that's what we're going to see in this parable today. And then the last thought to think about is that our petitions are music to God's ears. That's one of the things that our author asks us to think about, that God likes when we come to him in prayer, and he is very, very happy to hear from us.
It's one of my favorite parables. I love this widow. I was telling Shawn earlier, when I first looked at the passage, the first thing that came to mind, believe it or not, was a rock song from I don't know when, from Twisted Sister. We're not going to take it anymore.
Yeah, maybe we could do a quick chorus for everyone.
But I love this story.
Yep. It is fun. And I also told Norma before we started that when I read and saw what the topic was this week, she was one of the first people I thought of. So I guess we got some girl power today in this discussion. Okay. Well, we're definitely going to look at a woman who I think models some of the behaviors that all of us can maybe feel a little more comfortable and a little more empowered in our approach, in our relationship with how we talk to God and how we think of him as a guiding force in our life. Sometimes one of the things that immediately came about was that sometimes we are worried to ask for things. We're insecure or shy, or I think what happens to me a lot is I don't think it's important. I think, wow, I'm just not that important. My insignificant small concern is not something that I should trouble anybody with, let alone God, and so I think we're going to see hopefully some encouragement about that too. So I guess we're in Luke chapter 18, and Norma is going to start. We're going to read first verses 1 through 5, which is the parable.
Now he was telling them a parable to show that at all times they ought to pray and not to lose heart, saying, there in a certain city a judge who did not fear God and did not respect man. And there was a widow in that city, and she kept coming to him saying, give me legal protection from my opponent. And for a while he was unwilling, but afterward he said to himself, even though I do not fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow bothers me, I will give her legal protection, lest by continually coming she wear me out.
All right. Well, I got to give him credit. He's an honest guy. At least he didn't try to pretend like he cared. I guess that's okay. But what the parable, one thing I learned, and you probably already knew this, Norma, but it was interesting because Jesus has been telling the disciples a bunch of parables, and in this section of the book of Luke we see that he has been telling kind of one story after another, and that's how it's related in the book. And the one that just happened was Jesus kind of talking about the second coming, and we talked about that a little bit, and just kind of what it's going to be like after he leaves, and what earth, maybe kind of what perspectives will be like before he comes back, and how they should be looking forward to that. And I'm sure they were really confused and probably didn't have a good idea of what he was talking about. But also, one thing I learned about this parable is that a lot of the parables are just kind of happening in conversation. Jesus is with a certain person or a group of people, and a question is asked or the situation arises, and he responds with a story. But one unique feature of this particular parable is that it tells us before the parable begins that so Jesus told his parables for this reason, and it says to show them that they should always pray and not give up. And lots of the parables, we hear them, and there's definitely a teaching element, and I think we're kind of left to either assume or kind of get that information out of it ourselves. But in this case, Luke actually stated for us, Jesus told this parable, he told his disciples this parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up. So this one, it kind of gives us the lesson before the actual story. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, the cliff notes. It's
okay, here's what I'm supposed to get out of this parable. That's helpful. Because some of them, people have spent dissertations and books discussing, what the meaning might be. But in this case, he does set us up with a good clue, and that's what we're going to see. And so let's just talk about this persistent widow, because she gives me, I think she's spunky. But before we talk about the widow, I think we need to look at the character of this judge. He's the first one mentioned. You read, your translation said there was a judge in a certain city who didn't fear God, and he had no respect for people. I guess he just didn't care what anybody thought. Yep.
Some of the reading I've done is it wasn't untypical for the more corrupt judges, and probably, well, we won't go there, but to expect bribes in making decisions. Okay. It wasn't untypical for them to play to the more wealthy,
sure,
powerful people, because they're the ones that fed his wealth.
Okay.
So this was not unusual. One commentary I read suggested this was implying it was a secular judge rather than one of the Jewish temple folks you would go to for judgments. But the commentary I read said they could be just as corrupt.
Yeah.
So it's so easy for people of power to feel like they deserve it, and therefore feel like those who have no power are not worthy of their concern.
Right. Yep.
And so here is a woman in need. And as you were probably going to say, widows had no power at all. They
Right.
were, they typically, when you go into when a woman would go into a court case, you might say, she had a man with her who would speak for her.
Right.
This woman had no one to speak for her.
Yeah.
And the way it's worded here, it says, give me legal protection. So what this may have meant, of course, we don't know. There are no details here. But what may have happened is the man who was supposed to be looking after her may have just taken all the money and kept it for himself,
Sure.
rather than assisting her.
Right.
Or a relative of some fashion may have, taken advantage of her in some way, and she needed protection. It doesn't say whether she had children that she needed to care for.
Right.
There's so many possibilities here, but she was in dire need, and she was a person who had absolutely no power.
Yeah. And she had to have known all these things you're talking about too. And that's why I think, like I said, she's spunky, and I admire that. And that's kind of one of the messages we need to get out of this today, is that she probably knew this guy didn't care. And she probably knew he would, I'm sure his reputation, unless he was very brand new, his reputation was out there.
Right.
She knew her position, she knew her limitations. And yet she went anyway. I think of how many of us would have just never left the house. We would have thought, okay, there's no way I'm going to, be heard. There's no way I already know he doesn't care. It's quite clear. And as you just said, I'm powerless. Even the people who are supposed to maybe be sticking up for me aren't available. But she went to him, and since Luke took the time to tell us this parable is about being persistent with our prayer life, when I just think about that, think about how many times at night I'm tired and I'm like, oh, okay, let me say some prayers, and then I'm asleep. Or, in conversation, someone says something and you really meaningfully indicate that, I want to pray about that with you or for you, and then a few days have gone by, and just being persistent in our prayers and our communication with God about anything, and not even just concerns, but thanksgiving, but just that constant dialogue that we're encouraged, pray without ceasing. That is a very infinite kind of a word. That's not just pray as soon as you get the chance, or pray when it's comfortable, or pray when you feel heard, or you feel like you're important. And so this woman, I just think about just even that trek to the place where this judge is located, just all the things that must have been on her mind. And I was also just so overwhelmed by the thought that I have the assurance of knowing that God is not this judge.
Right.
That even if I feel like that woman sometimes, I'm not going to an uncaring judge who's in it for money, or is going to look at my status or my track record that day. He is just going to hear me, and I have that amazing opportunity. So that to me was also kind of the flip side of the coin.
And it's, and as part you're going to be reading further on is, the judge finally gives in to the woman because she doesn't stop. I mean, every time he sticks his head out the door, here she is. And it's, she doesn't give him a minute's peace.
Yes. Didn't it say so? Because eventually she's going to wear me out. He was just like, fine. Is that what it said? Yeah.
Well, in the commentaries, it says that is translated as she is going to give me a black eye.
Okay.
or she is going to, you know, everybody around
Yeah.
is hearing her calls for justice.
Right.
People are going to look at me and think badly about me.
Right.
They're
Yep.
going to think, well, maybe this woman does need justice, and maybe this judge is not, you know, she's making me look bad.
Yep.
And, and so it's sort of,
He gets
I
rid
thought
of
it
her
was
for
really
all
fun.
kinds of reasons. Yeah.
Yes, I thought
But
it was funny. It's going to give me a black eye.
it's kind of funny. But it's funny that he ultimately does what he was supposed to do to begin with, but not
Right.
for the right reason. He just does.
Yes.
Yeah. But because of her persistence. And that's obviously the message here. It's not,
Right.
you know, because he was a great guy or he had a change of heart or he wanted to even, yeah, he just didn't want to look bad and he wanted to get her off his back. Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, I'm going to read the next little bit and then we have some more things we can consider. And when I'm just thinking about, you know, those ending questions about prayer can be aggressive, you know, our lesson told us to think about that. Prayer can be aggressive and prayer can change people and we can sound like a broken record. And already we kind of see she did get an answer to her prayer and his behavior was adjusted. And so
Mhm.
prayer can change. But I'll go ahead and read the last few verses in this particular parable, which are verses 6 through 8. And the Lord said, listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, he will find faith, or will he find faith on the earth? And that was an interesting question.
Yes.
Yeah, the first few verses make sense. It's like, of course,
Right.
God's not this judge, and he's gonna deal justice, and he's gonna do it quickly. But then that last little question, but when the Son of Man comes back to earth, is he gonna find faith?
And it is a thought is, you know, how persistent are we
Yeah.
in our prayer, and how does that show that we have faith in God? There's this idea that we're supposed to present our prayer requests to God, say it once, and never say it again.
Right.
But the reality of it is, there are things I have been praying for years.
Yeah.
There are things that I have presented to God and have uh, concerns I have, that I have been presenting to God, and I haven't stopped praying for them. And I assume at some point, and I have seen this in the past, something will change. Either I will change, where I will see that need is not something vital,
Right.
or a solution will emerge.
Yep.
We are, so basically, we are given permission in this
Yes.
parable to keep banging on that door. You know,
Yep.
God, I know you hear, I know you have heard this before, but sit down, you're going to hear it again.
Yeah. I thought the same thing because not only are we sometimes hesitant to go to God in prayer for whatever reason, and before we kind of move on, it's probably important we talk about that. Why are we hesitant sometimes? Sometimes I think that's such a silly thing, maybe.
I am not sure why, except I have heard sermons that about literally, you know, present it to before God, because it shows the whole idea of faith.
Yeah.
It shows faith. If you present it to God and never mention it again, then that shows you have faith in God.
Right.
But that's not what this seems to say.
Why do we hesitate to be persistent? I mean, sometimes we hesitate to even ask in the first place.
Right.
Or, and I think lots of times too, sometimes if we have kind of that muddled vision of prayer as being this ask for something and wait for a get it or not reply. Whereas, prayer, as you evolve and as you grow as a Christian, it's a relationship, and it's just like you
Right.
and I. Yeah, I mean, I might come to you with a concern. I might just want to share something with you, and I know that you'll listen lovingly, and you might offer, maybe you just listen. And you had said a minute ago, sometimes there are things that are concerns or ideas on our mind for years,
Right.
but I think what we're also seeing too is this being persistent. This woman is, first of all, she, I think, probably is a faithful person. She's confident in maybe the righteousness of her position. And we can't always just demand that God give us our way. And I don't think that's what she's saying. I think she really firmly believes.
Justo El Gonzalez,
Okay.
who wrote a commentary on Luke.
Yeah.
Given some of the common interpretations of this parable, it's important to say something about what it is that the disciples are to pray for. The parable is not about praying for the things we want. It's not about being blessed with a fortune as a result of insistent prayer. It certainly is not about being successful in the present days. It is rather about being vindicated, even at a time when such vindication seems illusory. Noah and Lot knew they were right, even while their neighbors might disagree. Eventually, they were openly vindicated. It's he also says the only way to remain firm in our in the sense that we know we are doing the right thing, and often that is what we're praying about, when we are doing what we feel is the right thing.
Yep.
And yet the message is we're getting pushback on it, and to be able to say, God, am I going the right way? Lead me, show me.
Yeah.
And
Do you think it's kind of timely, our world, our country right now,
yes,
kind of struggling with those very issues? I think regardless of, which side you'd be on any political coin, I'm never going there, but the idea that there are some really big issues of discussion revolving around righteousness, and
right.
yeah, and just what is actually the righteous position or the righteous attitude or reaction. And that, I think, is maybe why it is so disconcerting and uncomfortable right now, because a lot of people are grappling with this very thing, and those voices that are being persistent.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Are
think,
sometimes uncomfortable.
yeah, absolutely.
But I think it's important, and we were talking about this earlier, to recognize that Jesus really spoke out. And we look at the Old Testament, and we also look at what Jesus said about the widows, the orphans, the refugees. These were the ones that the Bible tells us, the helpless, the ones who have no voice. These are the ones that we are called to be a voice for.
Right.
And in this parable, this woman who was among the voiceless,
right,
was giving voice. And it's almost sort of Jesus is giving her the approval. Yes, you have no power here. Yes, you have no voice here.
right.
Yell louder.
Yes. Well, yeah, and he chose her as the subject of his parable. I mean, he could have very easily said, a very, very faithful man, or a very, very faithful woman, or someone high in stature in society, had this issue and persistently went and asked, even though the judge was unrighteous. He could have used any character, really. I think, but the fact that he chose her to help us see not only her position, but yet her faith, regardless. Because, like you just said a minute ago, I bet it was it can be scary or it can be uncomfortable. I'm sure she was uncomfortable going to
He
ask.
was probably making other people uncomfortable.
Right.
It definitely made the judge uncomfortable.
And he was worried about what his peers might think. And so, yes, but just that closing idea where he said, don't, listen to what the unjust judge said, but of course God is going to respond so differently. And so,
Yes.
yeah, we should be faithful and we should be comfortable and pray not only our own persistent prayers, but as you just pointed out, and I think the underlying message here is too, we should be looking for ways to intercede for righteousness for those who may not have a strong voice or who might be in this position where they're uncomfortable, and we can pray for them and we can encourage
Right.
them to pray and encourage them to have faith. And because he said, when Jesus comes back, will he find faith on earth? Jesus asked that question. That's in the red ink, just so you know. That's Jesus saying, when the Son of Man, aka me, when I get back here, am I going to find faith? And he didn't say, am I going to find big temples built or big impressive institutions and lots of money,
crowds, or
exactly, lots of money raised in my name, which all those actually might be part of faith. I mean, I'm not denouncing those things. Sometimes those are a result of great faith. Those things happen. But I think he's saying, am I going to find this persistent attitude where I'm going to find people who keep coming and coming and coming because they know this reward at the end and they have faith that that's going to happen, and that the big answer to our prayer is coming, and that's,
yeah.
when you think about ultimately all of our prayers, when we're asking for righteousness or peace or comfort or, whatever it is we're concerned.
Wisdom.
Yes, grace, strength, forgiveness, helping us to be forgiving. All those things ultimately are kind of rolled into this idea of we're exercising our faith that we know that God has provided, this way for our sins to be forgiven, and that he is, busily working around us all the time and preparing a place for us, and he's working in the hearts of other people in situations. And so sometimes, I don't know about you, but I get very narrowly focused in my own little my own little prayer train, my own needs and concerns, and not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, we're made how we're made. But in this case, we can see how her behavior, even though she was insistent about her own need, it really affected other people. And
we are part of a bigger picture.
yes.
We are part of a world that is in need, and we need to be a voice for the voiceless.
Yep.
We need to speak out when we see injustice.
Yep.
It's not always easy.
Nope.
And even though things may be going well for us, they're not always going well for others. And to be able to intercede. And I guess part of faith is stepping out and speaking out and being present.
Right. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And so that's actually perfect, kind of leads me to these, just a few concluding thoughts that you and I can maybe help everybody else think about, because most of the questions when you end, a story like this or a lesson like this, they're kind of open-ended. I mean, we know the punchline, right? We know the end of the book. We know the promises that have been made, but we're also in this daily walk where we're growing as a person, and we're growing as an influence, and we're growing as we're learning to be influenced by others. We're all in this constant, I think, conversation with God in a way, whether we're actually voicing the words or not. Our daily life is an exercise of how we're reflecting our relationship with him. And like any other relationship, we've discussed that a lot in this format and these Bible studies, but it evolves and changes, and sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's struggling, and sometimes it's in a position of change. And I think that's like any relationship. But one thing I thought, as we look at this persistent widow and we look at the judge who wasn't just but God is a just judge, and he is a righteous ear that lovingly wants to hear us. A question to think about is, what does this mean for our own prayer life? And that's definitely, so many Christians I talk with, they'll say, I'm really great at doing the things. I'm great at volunteering. I like being nice to people, but my prayer life, I just can't ever get a hold of that. And I don't know about you, but do you hear that sometimes? I think that prayer life is a struggle for some people.
It is. And I think we go through seasons of our life where there are times when prayer seems easy as all get out, and there are times when we feel like we're banging our head against the wall. And just to be able to sit down and pray seems like, but I think that's where the persistence comes in. Because you think of the widow, how many times did the judge just roll his eyes and walk past her?
Yep.
But we have a God who loves us and cares for us, and therefore he doesn't seem to object us banging on his door.
No. And even and Jesus prays himself. We see that modeled in the New Testament, and he gives instruction a little bit, but he's always referring to God, as his Father. And it's a relationship. It's not this unknown being out there somewhere who, like the judge, really doesn't want to give us the time of day.
Mm-hmm.
It's a father figure that we can go to with everything. Yeah. And so the other thing, I thought we've already kind of covered a little bit, but our commitment to seeking what is right.
Mm-hmm.
I think also another a little lesson that you touched on, and we've just said, it's okay to stick up for things and be persistent when we see that someone is not being treated or served in the way that they could be. And if I have the power to do something about that, there's a lot of things I look out there in the world and I think that's not good, but maybe I'm not powerless, but I can pray about it.
Right.
And so I see, she's praying for herself in this case, or she's, kind of intervening for herself, but I'm just thinking about the message it's sending to us. You already mentioned there are a lot of people who don't have a voice, and we can be their voice, even just in prayer and seeking justice for them. And then just the judge, I kind of going to go back to him for a minute. I don't ever want to be the judge. I don't want to be someone who, I guess, doesn't listen with compassion, or I don't stop to hear someone else's concern with an open mind and a righteous heart. And I'm definitely guilty of probably being like him sometimes. I know that, but I think he also has a little message for us in this parable. He wasn't willing to hear it, and he was way more worried about what other people think and not at all concerned. He wasn't listening
Right.
with compassion. And sometimes I think, I might not understand someone else's concern. I might not understand their situation. I might not even agree with it. But if they're hurting or broken, and in this case, she is kind of the lowest of lows on the big totem pole of who's important in her society, she deserves time and compassion and listening. And so I thought, it's kind of, people do come to us with needs and concerns sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And not even always face to face. Sometimes we just see it. And yeah.
And the least we can do is listen.
Yes.
The least we can do is hear what they're having to say. And I love the fact that Jesus uses among the most helpless of their society,
yeah,
to show what it means to stand up and be persistent, to be strong in faith.
Yep.
She knew she was right. She knew what needed to be done. Yep. And she wasn't going to stop until it happened.
Absolutely. Yep. And so, that's the picture.
Persevere.
Yeah, persevere, and that is the picture for us. And like we said a minute ago, this is part of the long haul, being persistent when Jesus returns. but it's also just that everyday persistence, you know, getting up and having an attitude of persistence to pursue righteousness all day,
Hmm.
even in little things, you know, and be a good.
Yes, that constant conversation with God,
Yes.
just that ongoing touching base with God all during the day.
And even if you don't get the answer, if you don't sense an answer right away, she clearly went multiple times and walked away without an answer,
Hmm.
without resolution. But, you know, finally, one time she did get some resolution. And so, yeah, I think that's a great message for us. Thank you, Norma. I love being with you, talking with you.
It is fun.
It is
Thank
fun.
you.
Yeah, thanks
I
everybody out
had
there for
fun.
joining us. All right.